Good evening. Welcome to the City of Port St. Lucie and Mobility Plan and Fee Workshop. Thank you for joining us. For those of you that are here by Zoom or also in person, we want to thank you for taking the time out of your day and joining us to learn a little bit more about mobility fees and mobility plan and what that is. As a high-level background, we'll let you know that back in December, we started this process of looking at our mobility fees and hired New Urban Concepts, Jonathan Paul and Louis Rotundo, to begin the planning process and developing a mobility plan in order for the city to adopt a mobility fee by October 1. Today, you're going to learn a little bit more of what that is and the process and where we are at. This is actually one of many public workshops that we've had. We had one earlier today where we invited the members of the public to attend virtually and also in person. And we've had various one-on-one meetings and also other public workshops with our stakeholders. So the next, after today, we will be presenting a plan to City Council for public hearing in estimated time to be in August, and hopefully for adoption by that September in order to implement the fee October 1. At this time, I will hand it over to Jonathan Paul with New Urban Concepts, who's going to go through his presentation. And if you have any questions today, there is a Q&A on the bottom if you're joining us virtually that you can ask any questions there. We will answer them live. And if you're in person, please feel free to ask any questions or provide us any comments at the end of the presentation. So other than that, take it away, Jonathan.
All right. Thank you very much, Teresa. My name is Jonathan Paul. I'm the principal of New Urban Concepts, and with me is Mr. Louis Rotundo. And Louis and I have been working on mobility plans and mobility fees across the state of Florida for over 20 years now, including the very first one in Alachua County, which started back in 2007 and was adopted in 2010. And so there are a number of communities throughout the state of Florida that are dealing with traffic congestion, that are dealing with the issues of growth in their community. And a lot of these communities are dealing with similar issues in the fact that they grew up around the automobile. They planned for the cars, the roadways were designed for the cars, the street and the land development patterns really emphasize people driving. And a lot of the issues that St. Lucie County and Port St. Lucie face today as it relates to traffic are ones that are shared by neighboring communities throughout the state. And so the whole issue of congestion, there's a lot of debate on whether it's a good or bad thing. And some folks that are stuck in traffic on the interstate or on Port St. Lucie Boulevard, probably are cursing a little bit, saying traffic's horrible. Others will actually say congestion's a sign of prosperity. That people that want to be in a community that's vibrant, that's attractive to live at, one of the trade-offs is a lot of people want to be there. And in essence, there's congestion that derives from that. So there are places in Florida, especially within North Florida, that there isn't a whole lot of roadway congestion. There are other places, one example is Houston, which is one of the largest and fastest growing communities in the country. And they tried the idea of building their way out of congestion. So they built a 26-lane freeway with the promise that it's going to make things better. And the reverse is actually everything that they promised didn't come into fruition. Crashes increased, people actually drove slower, and the time to get places actually took longer. And part of that is because, in essence, the term you build it and they'll come, or what's known as induced demand. So in essence, as soon as you build a roadway or you widen a roadway, there's a propensity for people to shift over and use that corridor to drive on because it gets you from point A to point B quicker. But soon after, what most communities have found is that roadway capacity that's been provided is quickly used up. So more and more communities across the state of Florida are asking, is widening roadways the only way to solve traffic, and is it the best thing for our community? And so the legislature, in some respects, put the system in place that encouraged more and more roads to be built and to provide those roadways for new development. And that's what's known as transportation concurrency. And it was a policy, Florida statute, as part of the Growth Management Act all the way back in 1985 that was dealing with a lot of growth in Florida. Fast forward to 2020, and most communities in Florida are still dealing with a lot of growth, but they found different ways to solve that. But transportation concurrency was a requirement that as new development came online, you had to have roadway capacity in place to meet the demands of traffic. and so that worked fine in most communities as they were developing. But what more and more found is that you would approve development, that development would generate traffic, and the solution was to widen roads. But at some point, it started in the more urbanized areas of the state, in Broward County, Miami-Dade, and Pinellas County. They started 6-laning and 8-laning all their roadways. And at a certain point, they said, well, we can't keep widening our roads, and we need to start looking to do something different. And that's sort of transpired across communities throughout the state of Florida, whether it be the city of Port St. Lucie, Gainesville, Tallahassee, communities throughout the state are questioning, is widening roadways the only way to move people around? And more communities are realizing that you can't necessarily solve your traffic issues by just adding road capacity. So communities such as the city of Port St. Lucie sort of stopped, paused, and said, is there a different way to think differently about our future? And is there a way to move people around other than just driving? And there are. There's really one way to move a car, and that's to drive it. There's actually multiple ways to move people, whether they walk, bicycle, ride transit, use some new form of technology, such as Uber or Lyft, or even hop on a golf cart. And so increasingly, communities are starting to expand their transportation network to accommodate multiple modes of travel and not just travel by car. And so part of the mobility plan that the city is embarking upon is looking at other ways of travel to meet future travel demands within the city. And so part of that is a mobility plan. And a mobility plan is a vision over the next 25 years for how people, businesses, and visitors are going to move about Port St. Lucie. And to fund that network and to fund the improvements identified as part of a mobility plan, the city is looking at a mobility fee. And a mobility fee is in essence a replacement of a roadway impact fee. A roadway impact fee is something that's charged to new development to mitigate their traffic impact. And a mobility fee would replace that and provides the city with additional flexibility to fund sidewalks, bicycle lanes, transit service, as well as roadway improvements within the city. And so the mobility plan is being looked at as part of 2 phases. The first phase is looking at a corridor approach and identifying and determining where road capacity is or is not needed. And then where road capacity is not needed, are there other types of improvements, wider trails, a dedicated lane for golf carts, potentially a lane for transit vehicles, those type of corridors identified initially. And then the second phase of this process would be looking at individual corridors such as Port St. Lucie Boulevard, Gatlin, Becker, to determine what types of specific improvements are needed along those corridors that would best meet the needs of the community. And so mobility fees, both the city and county have fees today, roadway impact fees, and they fund new roads. They fund widening roads, they fund traffic signals, they fund roundabouts. They're essentially there to fund road capacity. And the city's proposed mobility fee would both fund road capacity, but it would also fund other modes of transportation. So enhanced sidewalks, enhanced bicycle lanes. And it's something that's charged to new development only. It's not a tax. It's not a reoccurring assessment on any type of property. Essentially, if you have a vacant piece of land today and you build a structure on it, whether it be a home or a business, you would be subject to a mobility fee. If you expand a home or expand a business and it generates additional traffic, you would also be responsible for a mobility fee. But if you own a home or a business today and you're not looking to add to it, you're not looking to expand the business, the mobility fee would not apply to you. It's not something that you'd pay because it's not a tax and it's not an assessment. So why is the city doing this? Part of the rationale is to provide the city council with greater flexibility to determine when projects are actually built, and to also determine how quickly they're built. One of the issues between the county and city today is the collection of roadway impact fees and how quickly they are being spent. And for the most part, they're being spent, at a relatively cautious pace in areas of the community that aren't necessarily within the city of Port St. Lucie. So the city owning its own mobility fee would allow the city council to prioritize when the projects are built, what types of projects are built, and whether or not the city wants to go after additional revenue sources, such as bonding or other financing mechanisms, to advance infrastructure, something that the county has historically not wanted to pursue. So impact fees and mobility fees. The primary difference is impact fees fund road capacity. Mobility fees fund multimodal improvements. The other big difference is roadway impact fees within the city and the county are just based on how much it costs to add theoretical capacity, whether you're going to 4-lane a road, 6-lane a road. It's not actually based on whether you're going to widen Traditions Parkway or you're going to make an improvement to California. It's just based on a basic cost of capacity and a basic cost of a roadway. Whereas the mobility fee is actually based on a specific list of corridors that the city is going to adopt and eventually a specific list of multimodal projects that will actually form the basis for the fee itself. And so the fee, beyond being plan-based, also provides the city with increased opportunities to fund multimodal transportation. And so Port St. Lucie would not be the first community in Florida to do this. The first two were Alachua County and Pasco County back in 2010 and 2011. And since that time, a number of communities throughout the state, both cities and counties, have embarked on developing mobility plans and mobility fees. And some of the early adopters had some different names that they associated with it, but essentially they were fees to fund multimodal transportation. Included in the presentation are just a few examples of other mobility plans within other communities in the state of Florida. St. Augustine's one that's finalizing it's actually adopted its mobility plan already, and it's finalizing its mobility fee. And they look to create a multimodal environment that also included parking and promoted parking along the periphery of its historic downtown, and then it's encouraging people to walk, bike, use a scooter or golf cart to actually get around the city itself. Up in the Panhandle, Walton County and the Seaside development are looking at a multimodal transportation system as well. And they're heavily emphasizing electric bicycle travel, golf cart travel, and also transit circulators. And so it's a lot of different ways, and these are two communities that both are facing rapid growth, but they also are two major tourist destinations as well. And so they have significant transportation needs that can't be solved by just adding road capacity. And over on the West Coast, the city's rough counterpart, if you go straight across the strait, the city of Bradenton is embarking on a mobility plan and mobility fee as well. And one of the unique features that the city is considering is actually using a water taxi to provide service between its downtown and out into the beach and the coastal communities as part of its overall plan. So there's a lot of different communities that are looking at different ways to get people around. But one thing specific about a mobility plan is it's designed to meet the needs of the community it's being developed for. So Port St. Lucie's mobility plan is going to be unique to the city of Port St. Lucie. Just like a lot of the other plans within the state of Florida are unique to the communities that are being developed. So there are multiple steps that go into developing a mobility plan and a mobility fee. We're in steps 2, 3, and 4 in terms of the plan development of the fee, and an ordinance to implement it. And then there are several other steps that go along the way to administer the fee itself. But the primary ones as part of this effort are steps 2, 3, and 4. The city's already adopted policies in its comprehensive plan to date, which govern how the roadway system's built, how land use patterns are developed, and how the city is going to fund its transportation needs. So the city's comprehensive plan already envisioned looking at a mobility fee system to fund the multimodal transportation system planned within the community. And so as I briefly mentioned earlier, the first phase of this process is developing corridors for the mobility plan, and those will be mobility corridors, which will include new capacity, whether it be a widened road or a brand new road, plus complete streets, which are sidewalks, bicycle lanes, and transit stops. They'll also be looked at multimodal corridors, which feature enhanced pathways, sidewalks, trails, mid-block crossings, and also the potential for dedicated lanes for transit or potentially either golf carts as well. The plan will also identify intersection improvements. One set will be to make intersections of mid-block crossings safer for people walking and bicycling. The other will be to actually add roadway capacity and turn lanes at those intersections. And in the second phase, which is going to be a lot more community outreach and a lot more one-on-one interaction with the community, is that's when we'll actually determine the specific types of improvements that go along each one of these mobility plan corridors. And so here's just some of the modes of travel that will be considered and accommodated through a mobility plan, whether it be electric bicycles, golf carts, e-scooters. We'll possibly look at any opportunities for a water taxi, at least across the St. Lucie River initially, and maybe eventually out to across the intercoastal. One innovative form of transportation that exists today in the community is what's known as an autonomous transit shuttle. And these are essentially vehicles that are driverless, and they take people from point A to point B, and it's running in traditions today. So while driverless vehicles are something that most people think is going to happen in the future, this is actually something happening in this community today, and the mobility plan looks to expand on those efforts. Complete streets is just sort of an example of how you go from a multi-lane roadway, which, best example is probably Port St. Lucie Boulevard, 6-lane section with a 5-foot sidewalk on the roadway, and maybe some sections do or don't have bike lanes, and transforming that into what's known as a complete street with a wider pathway, with the introduction of landscaping, and even potentially looking at repurposing some of the travel lanes themselves to accommodate additional modes of travel. Here's just an example in the city of Altamont Springs where they had a 4-lane divided roadway, and the outside lane they actually made are in the process of making part of it for transit vehicles only, and another part for golf carts, electric bikes, and scooters, all using the existing roadway itself. And so the mobility plan is intended to evolve over time. It's not intended to be a static document, but it's something that's intended to grow as the community grows, and also to change different modes of travel and look at different modes of travel. And this is something that we'll detail in further examples and cross-sections and alternatives for each one of these mobility plan corridors. And so there have been a number of studies that have already been conducted to date as part of the county, the city, the Metropolitan or the Transportation Planning Organization as part of their 2045 plan. And they've identified improvements throughout the city and throughout the county. One thing, the graphic on the left shows some of the county projects that are being proposed and that are looking at being funded by the county's existing roadway impact fee. And if you notice, actually most of those improvements actually are Midway Road and north, occurring both within Fort Pierce and in the unincorporated portions of the county north of the city of Port St. Lucie. There's actually a portion of Glades Cutoff, and an intersection improvement along St. Lucie West are actually the only two improvements that the county is looking at to fund as part of its roadway impact fee over the next 5 years. The long-range transportation plans identified some transit routes within the city and a few multimodal corridors, but the city itself actually identified a fairly robust parks master plan that's identified a number of greenways and trails and pathways throughout the city. And some of that's actually been converted to existing types of corridors and what the city itself would like to see in the future in terms of a trail and a shared use path network. So this is actually the portion of the draft of the mobility plan today. This is an excerpt from the eastern portion of the city along the US 1 corridor near Walton Road. And you see most of these areas are shown in green, and those are really opportunities to look at enhancing the existing multimodal network, whether it be sidewalks, bike lanes, or trails. The red corridors you see are roadways that we're actually looking to add road capacity to. In addition, you'll see the green and red intersections. The green shows multimodal improvements or safety improvements at intersections. The red shows where you would actually add turn lanes, a traffic signal, or some type of road capacity. An overall mobility plan has been developed for the city itself. And what you'll notice is west of Interstate 95, you see a lot of needs for new roadways. Some of those are widening existing roads. Others are brand new corridors that are going out there. But predominantly you see a roadway need, and each one of these roadways would have pathways, trails, sidewalks as part of it, but principally they're adding new road capacity. As you go between the Turnpike and Interstate 95, you see a few corridors, Port St. Lucie Boulevard, California, that are actually funded projects today that are looking to have lanes added to them. And then you get west or east of the Florida Turnpike, and the number of corridors you see needing to be widened is less. And it's something that we'll be looking at further. There's a couple of corridors on here that some residents have expressed some hesitation with. The South Bend corridor in particular is something that some residents of the community would like to see widened, others not. So that's something that we'll be having a further discussion with the City Council on. And as you get to east of the Port St. Lucie River, or the St. Lucie River, you actually see very few roadway widening projects. Most of the need in this area, which is predominantly built out, is looking at multimodal improvements. And so without going into a whole lot of detail, we're looking at a number of different factors to determine how the community is going to grow and what growth is actually needed and what roadway projects are actually needed. And one of these tools is what's known as the regional travel demand model, and that projects traffic out into the future. And some areas of the community are expected to see significant increases. West of Interstate 95, there's roughly a 260% increase in future traffic projected, which, if you notice, a lot of that area is being developed now. That tends to make a lot of sense. But you look at east of the St. Lucie River, and projected growth is at 47%. And so there's much less need in that portion, and the mobility plan itself will actually reflect this future need. We're also looking at what's known as level of service. That's an evaluation of the capacity of a roadway today. And currently, roadways are evaluated on a roadway by roadway basis. Florida statute, as part of developing the mobility plan and mobility fee, encourages cities and counties to look at roadways different and to actually look at multiple corridors at once in an area-wide basis to determine when you do or don't need additional road capacity. So we're looking at two different alternatives, one primarily focusing on north-south travel, the other focusing on both north-south and east-west travel, and using these as a tool and a guide to say when should the city consider adding additional road capacity if there's even a need for additional road capacity. And so beyond the travel model, we're also looking at traffic today. You know, what are the traffic conditions on these roadways today? How much can they handle? When do they need to be looked at? And are there actually parallel corridors that could be used? So maybe you don't necessarily have to widen a roadway, or that roadway could be widened a little bit further in the future. So part of this will play into the overall prioritization and identification of projects as part of the mobility plan. We'll also be adopting what are known as quality of service standards, and that measures how safe or comfortable somebody feels walking or bicycling along the street. And these standards will play a bigger role in the second phases of this overall process. And so the city is considering two different assessment areas, and what an assessment area is the fee itself would vary. So today within the city and county, a development that comes in, they pay the same fee whether they're on US 1 or they're out in traditions. As part of this process, we're going to look at, should that fee along the US 1 corridor be lower? And part of that is because trips tend to be shorter in length. There's a greater mixture of overall land uses. And as the map showed earlier, there aren't many roadway needs in that area east of the river. So there's a potential the fee itself may be lower. We're going to run this analysis, have a discussion with the city council, and the city council will ultimately provide direction on whether there should be varying fees or whether there should be a uniform fee within the city. The other component of the overall mobility plan, mobility fee effort is what's known as a benefit district, and this determines where the fee is paid is where it's spent. And so a development coming along Becker, or along Traditions, along Midway, those funds would be spent within the city as part of the mobility fee. To provide some perspective, the county today, with the exception of the islands, has one district for the entire county. So that means, a development coming in along Becker, paying its roadway impact fee, that money can be spent on improving access to the airport in the northern part of the county. Now, whether or not, that whole provision is consistent with statute, it's something, the county eventually will have to look at. But as part of the city's effort itself, the city is initially considering a single benefit district that's the city limits and the area directly surrounding the city, to ensure that somebody that pays that fee in Traditions, pays that fee in US 1, sees that money actually spent where it's being paid. And so the final component of the mobility plan and mobility fee is what's known as a mobility fee schedule. This is somewhat similar to the existing schedule of impact fees today in terms of listing different types of land uses and the fee itself. A few differences are the assessment areas that are being proposed east and west of the river, and in terms of the number of categories that are also being proposed. And so just to point out a couple, you have residential uses that will pay on a per square foot basis. You have hotels that will pay on a per room basis. And then you have a bunch of other different types of uses, whether they be institutional, industrial, or recreational uses that will all pay varying fees based upon their overall impact. The most significant component of the recommendation to the moving forward would be adopting what's known as a local mobility fee. This would accommodate mom and pop types of businesses and local retail uses and result in an overall lower fee within the city for locally types of retail uses. And then recognizing the impact of high trip generating land uses, whether it be a gas station, a car wash, or even a restaurant with a drive-through lane. Those components of a land use that generate a lot of traffic would pay a higher mobility fee to offset that impact. And the end result of all this discussion of the mobility plan, these various level of service analyses and the various mobility corridors and the mobility fee schedule, is an actual dollar amount paid by new development. And so today, a home coming in the community pays a portion of its fee to the county, and pays a portion of its fee to the city. And so for a residential unit that's 2,400 square feet or less, $5,100 today is paid to the county. $1,200 today roughly is paid to the city. So that development coming in would pay $6,300, most of which goes to the county. Under the mobility fee, all those funds would actually go to the city, and the city itself would determine how they're spent and how they're prioritized. Now, in order to have a fee in place by October 1st of this year, the fee itself needs to be lower than these calculated rates, and whether it's $1 lower or $1,000 lower will ultimately come up in terms of once we complete the mobility plan and the mobility fee technical report. But at the end of the day, the vast majority of the money developers in the city today pay to mitigate their traffic goes to the county, and the county presently can spend that money anywhere within the county except for the islands. So they can spend money paid off of Gatlin up in Fort Pierce. They can spend money collected in Fort Pierce and Traditions. The county can pretty much spend it anywhere they want. Under the mobility fee, the city would collect the majority of the money that you see up there today and spend that money within the city or on projects that are directly adjacent to the city itself. And so as we go through this process, a lot of the technical analyses that we mentioned, we're finalizing that and wrapping up, and we will have a draft report available to the community to look at, likely by the end of this month or the first part of July. We'll then be going to hold public workshops. In July, we're looking at a first reading of an ordinance for adoption in August, a second reading in September, for an effective adoption date of October 1st of this year. So a lot of the detail that we're talking about now will be memorialized in a technical report itself for members of the public to view. Many of the items that we discussed today were presented before the City Council, and overall the City Council encouraged this approach and at least went with our recommendation as this is the most appropriate way to move forward in the city. But the City Council did reserve the right to make additional changes or to require us to do some additional analyses once we actually have a final document for them to look at. So that's really the next focus of our overall efforts, is to produce that finalized plan and a technical report that documents how the fee is calculated. And with that, I'll open it up to any questions you may have. I know we've presented a lot of this, and Teresa and Bolivar will, at the end, address how you can reach out to us further if you have any questions. With that, I'll turn it back over to Teresa and Bolivar.
Okay, well, thank you, Jonathan. Just as a reminder, if anyone has any additional questions, feel free to use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen if you are attending via Zoom. Jonathan, we do have one question that did come in, which reads, since we live in a hurricane state, if a hurricane destroys a home partially or fully, would the homeowner need to pay a mobility fee if the home has existed since the mid-1980s, as an example?
No, they would not. So if you're rebuilding a home that was destroyed either by fire or some natural cause, and you're rebuilding that home, no, you would not pay a mobility fee. It's just for brand new development.
Okay, so seeing no other questions via Zoom, does anyone in person have any questions? Okay, not seeing any at this time. So we do want to take this time to thank everyone that attended in person or virtually. For any additional questions or follow-up, feel free to email myself, bgomez@cityofpsl.com, as well as Teresa Lamar Sarno and Jonathan Paul, who is the project manager for this project. With that, Teresa, did you want to add anything additional? Okay, so that wraps up the presentation. Again, thank you all for attending, and we look forward to hearing from anyone else in the future on this. Thank you.
Thank you.